You've probably heard of girl math. It's that playful way people justify spending money, like saying a $200 pair of shoes is basically free if you wear them enough times. Or that concert tickets bought months ago don't really count because the money's already gone. Funny, right? But underneath the humor lies something very real, something psychologists have been studying for decades. It's the way our minds rationalize decisions, especially the bad ones. And it's not just about money. It's about how we protect our sense of self, our confidence, and our emotions when faced with choices that don't quite make sense. And let's slow down and explore what's really happening inside the brain when we rationalize. Why do we twist logic to make ourselves feel better? And how can we become more aware of it? In 1957, psychologist Leon Festinger proposed something revolutionary: cognitive dissonance. It's that uncomfortable tension you feel when your actions don't match your beliefs. Like saying you care about your health but lighting a cigarette anyway. Your brain hates that mismatch. So to ease the discomfort, it changes the story. You might think, well, I only smoke socially, or my grandfather smoked and lived to 90. The action stays the same, but the narrative shifts. That mental storytelling is what keeps us sane, but it's also what keeps us stuck. Let's take girl math again. You're scrolling online, see a cute bag, and think, it's on sale, so I'm actually saving money. That's a mini act of rationalization. The dissonance between wanting to save and wanting to spend is uncomfortable. So your brain builds a bridge, a story that makes both choices feel consistent. A 2021 study from the Journal of Consumer Research found that people are almost 40% more likely to justify impulse purchases if they can frame them as practical or emotionally rewarding. It's not that we're bad with money, it's that our brains are incredibly skilled at emotional accounting. Now, before you think this is just a shopping problem, let's widen the lens. Rationalization shows up everywhere. In relationships, we stay with people who aren't good for us because we tell ourselves they'll change. At work, we avoid big opportunities because we convince ourselves it's not the right time. We do this not because we're lazy or foolish, but because our brains are wired to protect our self-image. Think of your mind as a lawyer, not a judge. A judge looks for truth. A lawyer defends the client, no matter what. When you make a questionable decision, your brain doesn't seek justice. It builds a defense. It gathers evidence, creates arguments, and presents a story that keeps your ego intact. And we all have our favorite strategies. One of the most common is the sunk cost fallacy. You've probably felt it before. You've already spent hours on a project, so you keep going, even if it's clearly failing, because quitting feels like wasting all that effort. Economists call it irrational persistence. Psychologists call it emotional investment. Either way, it's a trick of the mind. A 2018 study from the University of Toronto found that people are 60% more likely to continue with a losing investment if they've already put significant time or money into it. The more we invest, the harder it is to walk away. Not because it's logical, but because giving up feels like admitting we were wrong. That's another piece of the puzzle: ego preservation. Humans have a deep need to feel consistent. We like to think of ourselves as rational, competent, and in control. So when reality threatens that image, the brain steps in to rewrite the script. Ever notice how, after a breakup, people often say, "It was for the best"? That phrase is pure cognitive rebalancing. It's a way to protect the self from pain. The mind reframes loss as wisdom, failure as experience. And in a way, that's healthy, up to a point. But when rationalization becomes chronic, it can trap us in denial. Let's look at another form: moral rationalization. It's how people justify actions that violate their own values. Maybe someone cheats on a test and says everyone else was doing it, or lies at work and thinks it's just business. Quote, in 2020, researchers at Harvard found that moral rationalization allows people to maintain a positive self-image even after unethical choices. They call it moral disengagement. It's like a psychological safety valve, letting us act against our values without feeling guilt. But guilt, though uncomfortable, serves a purpose. It's a signal that something's off. When we rationalize too quickly, we silence that signal. We lose the chance to learn from discomfort. Now here's the tricky part. Rationalization doesn't always sound like denial. Sometimes it sounds like logic. That's why it's so convincing. Our brains can turn almost any decision into a story that makes sense, at least to us. You might say, "I deserve this," or "it's not that bad," or "I'll start tomorrow." Each phrase is like a tiny anesthetic, numbing the sting of contradiction. We also use social rationalization, where we borrow justification from others. If everyone in your friend group spends freely, your spending feels normal. If everyone drinks heavily, your habit feels moderate. The context becomes the cushion. And because humans are social animals, we calibrate our sense of normal by what others do. A fascinating experiment from Princeton in 2019 showed that people are 25% more likely to stick with a questionable belief if they perceive it as socially accepted. That's why we often rationalize behaviors that match our group, even if they clash with our personal values. So how do we break free from this? How do we notice when our brain's lawyer is hard at work defending a bad choice? The first step is awareness. Rationalization thrives in the dark. When you slow down and actually name the story you're telling yourself, it loses power. Ask simple questions. What evidence do I have for this belief? Am I explaining or excusing? Would I give the same advice to a friend? These questions interrupt the mental script. They move you from automatic defense to conscious reflection. The second step is emotional tolerance. It's uncomfortable to admit you were wrong. It stings to face regret or guilt. But those feelings are not enemies, they're teachers. A 2022 study from the Journal of Experimental Psychology found that people who reflect on regret instead of suppressing it make better future decisions and exhibit higher self-control. Regret, when used well, builds wisdom. Think of it like muscle growth. When you lift weights, the muscle fibers tear slightly. They repair stronger. In the same way, when your self-image is challenged and you sit with that discomfort, your psychological muscles adapt. And then there's humor, the softer side of awareness. That's what makes girl math so interesting. It's self-awareness disguised as comedy. When people laugh at their own rationalizations, they're half a step closer to seeing through them. It turns shame into insight. But there's a fine line between laughing at our quirks and using humor to avoid accountability. If every questionable decision becomes a meme, we risk normalizing the very habits that hold us back. So the key is balance, gentle self-compassion paired with honest reflection. Let's bring this down to a real-life scenario. Imagine you've been meaning to eat healthier. You pick up a salad for lunch, then grab a cookie as a reward. You tell yourself, I deserve this because I was good today. That's rationalization in action. But if you pause and ask, what am I actually rewarding? You might realize the cookie isn't about food. It's about emotion. You want comfort, relief, or a sense of control. When you name the emotion, you can address it directly rather than through logic gymnastics. Another example, you buy an expensive gadget you don't need, then justify it by saying, it'll make me more productive. But will it? Maybe. Or maybe it's a way to feel progress without actually changing habits. Our brains love symbolic actions. They give the illusion of improvement. Behavioral economist Dan Ariely once described this as the IKEA effect. When we build something ourselves or invest effort into it, we overvalue it, even if it's flawed. That's why you might hold on to a half-broken DIY project, telling yourself it's special. It's not the object you're attached to, it's the justification story behind it. Let's talk about memory for a moment. Our brains don't store events like a video recorder. They store narratives, edited, compressed, emotionally charged. Every time we recall a decision, we slightly rewrite it to make it fit our current self-image. That's why, over time, our bad decisions start to sound more reasonable in hindsight. Memory itself becomes part of the rationalization process. Neuroscientists have found that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain involved in reasoning and planning, works hand in hand with the limbic system, which manages emotion. When there's dissonance, the prefrontal cortex often bends logic to calm emotional distress. In other words, reasoning is not separate from feeling. It's shaped by it. We don't think our way out of emotion, we think our way around it. Now, if this sounds discouraging, it's not meant to be. Understanding rationalization isn't about catching yourself in lies. It's about learning how the mind protects itself. Every excuse, every justification is a clue about what you value and what you fear. If you rationalize overspending, maybe you crave freedom or self-expression. If you rationalize staying in a bad job, maybe you value stability or fear uncertainty. When you decode the hidden motive, you can meet the need more directly. Here's a gentle exercise. Next time you catch yourself explaining a decision, pause. Ask, what feeling am I trying to avoid right now? Is it guilt? Shame? Fear? Then, instead of fighting the feeling, breathe into it. That moment of honesty can shift everything. Rationalization often thrives on speed, quick mental justifications that bypass reflection. So slowing down is power. Even a 10-second pause between impulse and action can open a window for awareness. You might still make the same choice, but consciously, not defensively. There's also a social layer to all this. When we share our justifications with others, we invite feedback. Sometimes that's uncomfortable, but it's how we anchor our reality. An interesting study from Stanford in 2023 found that people who verbalize their reasoning to others are twice as likely to spot flaws in their logic compared to those who keep it internal. Speaking externalizes the narrative. It turns the inner lawyer into a witness stand. So maybe the next time you catch yourself saying, "It's fine, I deserve it," try saying it out loud. Hear how it sounds. Does it still feel true? Our thoughts often lose power when exposed to air. Let's circle back to girl math for a moment. It became popular because it's relatable. We all do some form of mental accounting. And deep down, we know the math doesn't add up, but we laugh because it feels harmless. A small way to make sense of contradictions. The danger is when those tiny rationalizations add up over time, steering us away from our goals. Imagine rationalization as a GPS with a slight calibration error. If it's off by just 1 degree, you won't notice right away. But after miles of travel, you end up far from where you meant to go. That's how subtle mental stories can redirect a life trajectory, one tiny justification at a time. Now, let's talk about how culture shapes rationalization. In Western societies, individual freedom is prized. So people often justify choices through personal entitlement. I've earned this. I deserve to be happy. In collectivist cultures, rationalization might sound different, more relational. My family expects this, or it's for the group. Different words, same mechanism. The human brain everywhere seeks coherence, a story that lets us feel consistent with our values, whatever those values may be. Interestingly, research from the University of Tokyo in 2021 found that people are more likely to rationalize decisions that align with cultural expectations, even when they personally disagree. That shows how deeply our need for social harmony influences our private logic. So what's the way forward? Awareness, honesty, and self-forgiveness. Because once you start noticing your rationalizations, it's easy to swing into self-criticism. But remember, rationalization isn't a flaw, it's a feature. It's your psyche's attempt to keep you safe. The goal isn't to eliminate it, but to understand it. To thank your brain for trying to help, and then decide consciously what to do next. Let's say you realize you've been rationalizing staying in a draining job. Instead of beating yourself up, ask, what fear is this rationalization protecting me from? Maybe it's fear of financial instability. Maybe it's fear of starting over. Once you name the fear, you can address it directly. Budgeting, planning, upskilling, rather than hiding behind logic. That's how self-awareness becomes empowerment. There's a phrase psychologists use, functional delusion. It means a belief that's slightly distorted but helps you cope. We all have them. Like, everything happens for a reason, or I'll figure it out somehow. These small rationalizations can be healthy. They create hope and motivation. The key difference is whether they move you forward or keep you stuck. So next time your mind starts justifying something, check. Is this story helping me grow or helping me avoid? That single question can reveal the truth beneath the narrative. Now let's talk about how technology feeds rationalization. Social media makes it easier than ever to compare ourselves and construct justifications. We scroll through highlight reels, feel a twinge of envy, and tell ourselves, they just got lucky, or I'm happy for them, but I wouldn't want that lifestyle anyway. Sometimes it's true. Sometimes it's a comfort story. A 2022 Pew study found that 64% of users admit to downplaying their envy online through rationalizations that protect self-esteem. It's emotional self-defense in the age of comparison. Even algorithms play a role. Platforms are designed to keep us engaged, so every small dopamine hit, the like, the purchase, the view, gets mentally justified as harmless. But multiply that by hundreds of tiny moments, and you've got a feedback loop of rationalized behavior. Awareness here means zooming out. Ask yourself not just, why did I do this once, but what pattern am I reinforcing? Patterns reveal the deeper story. And speaking of stories, the human brain is a storytelling machine. We don't just make decisions, we narrate them. Every time you choose, you're also choosing a version of who you are. The story you tell about your decisions becomes your identity. So if your internal narrative is full of justifications, your identity subtly shifts toward defensiveness. But if your narrative is full of curiosity, why did I do that? What can I learn? Your identity shifts toward growth. That's the quiet magic of awareness. It rewrites who you believe yourself to be. Let's ground this in one last example. Imagine two friends. Both overspend on a vacation they can't really afford. The first says, "You only live once, it was totally worth it." The second says, "I had an amazing time, but next time I'll plan better." Both acknowledge the decision, but only one integrates awareness. The difference isn't guilt, it's growth. And that's what this whole conversation is about. Not shaming yourself for bad decisions, but seeing the mental patterns behind them. Because once you see the pattern, you can rewrite it. Your brain will still try to rationalize. It's built that way. But you'll start catching it in real time. You'll smile when you hear the inner lawyer warming up. And instead of handing it the microphone, you'll say, "Thanks, but I've got this." That's the point where self-awareness turns into freedom. Before we wrap up, remember, your mind isn't your enemy. It's a storyteller trying to keep the plot coherent. But you're the author. You decide when the story changes. And if you enjoy exploring how the brain works, how it tricks and teaches us, make sure to subscribe to Tortoise Brain. Because the more we understand our minds, the more power we have to steer them. So next time you catch yourself saying, it doesn't really count, or it was basically free, smile. You've just spotted your brain doing what it does best, making sense of the messy, emotional business of being human. And that awareness, quiet and gentle as it may seem, is the beginning of real wisdom.